News today, double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork will face a fresh hearing after challenging a decision to keep him behind bars. We're now delighted to be joined by criminal solicitor Joseph Kotrie-Monson. Joseph, good morning. We've spoken before. I made my feelings very well known about Gary Glitter. I feel exactly the same about Colin Pitchfork. I'm getting rather sick of these conversations. Your thoughts, my friend, this morning?
Well, I think I share those sentiments. Good morning, Jeremy and Rosie. Colin Pitchfork committed the vilest of crimes, didn't he, 30 years ago? And the families of the victims, ourselves, when we're discussing this, will never be satisfied with the idea of his release, I think, at any age. That said, he was given a sentence eventually of 28 years, and the law at the time said that was the sentence. Whole life orders, statutory whole life orders, did not exist at that time. So the question now for the Parole Board, which is an unenviable task, is not, is Colin Pitchfork a scumbag? Is he a murderer? Does he deserve to stay in prison? It's, is he a risk to the public? And that's a real challenge for some people. And you can see why, because we're unhappy with him being out, but we don't punish people retrospectively in this democracy. We punish people according to the law at the time. As far as the chronology of this, these events now with regard to appeals, etc., you will recall he was released initially under close supervision in 2021. He was recalled just 2 months later. I think that was as a result from intelligence gathered in part by a BBC article. And the Parole Board decided in retrospect that that decision was not based, to recall him, was not based on proper evidence. I think probably because it was rather more journalistic than evidence-based, but I don't know the case in that level of detail. The appeal judge said that decision for him to be released was appealed by the government. And the appeal judge has said, okay, it's one thing that you've said that your decision to recall him was wrong, but you haven't addressed ongoing risk. So now it's gone back to the Parole Board for a decision on ongoing risk. And that will be the very narrow consideration for them.
Yeah, Joseph, how do they try and work that out? What factors are they looking at to come to that decision?
Well, in common or garden cases, because this applies actually in many cases that are much less serious, they'll look at things like progress in prison, but they'll also look at the events themselves where the person was that might have contributed to the offending in the first place. Of course, one might just think a murderer is a nasty person, a murderer is a murderer, especially this type of murderer. But they'll also look at things like capacity to commit offences. Colin Pitchfork, you've seen that red-faced photo of him when he was arrested. He was a virile young man in his 20s. He's now 63. I don't know much about, for example, his physical state. He might be in a wheelchair for all we know. I don't know that that's the case, but these are the types of considerations that might affect capacity to commit offences. And that's what the Parole Board are interested in.
I think it's really interesting, Joseph, to get your very balanced take on these stories, because the emotion runs high. It runs high when children and people commit such heinous crimes. And it's good actually to hear from a legal stance that you understand that, but there are laws in place. My thing is, repeatedly, I think there are certain people who shouldn't see the light of day, and it frustrates the hell out of me that you get given a sentence in this country and you're out within half the time. And actually, talking to you increasingly about these subjects, it makes me realise it's a pretty unenviable task being in the Parole Board, isn't it, to be fair?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I do want to say one thing, and that's that if Colin Pitchfork, according to our current law, was sentenced for these murders, it would have been a whole life term, almost certainly. But yeah, point taken with regard to your feelings on it. I think the Parole Board is difficult. We talked about it previously, didn't we? On the one hand, they're addressing matters of risk. At the same time, these are proceedings broadly behind closed doors, and that frustrates us a bit because we don't know the inner workings of it, but there are good reasons for that. Do victims' families Jeremy, want the whole thing rehearsed everywhere they look. When they go and get a pint of milk at the corner shop, and they see the newspapers and those names at the front and the details of those crimes and the faces of their children, they don't want public proceedings for the most part. Justice should be seen to be done, but justice should be sensitive in cases like this. And I think for that reason, they are behind closed doors, but it probably adds to our frustration not knowing exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and we talked before about the kind of public misconceptions we have about how the parole board hearing goes. Joseph, it's been fascinating as always.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.